might be a little more stable, if you will, than just saying everything above $2.5 billion in the sale of automobiles will be dedicated to that. And then we hit some rough times and sales of automobiles go down and we don't see that. And then what do we do? We're just going to stall it out.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm very thankful to the people of Texas for supporting the proposition in November. That was a great step forward. I think people need to recognize that if you look at the legislature, you don't get everything you want in one cycle, right? In order to really affect change, it takes many sessions typically on things of this magnitude. And so I'm proud of the fact that we're taking it seriously. I like to maintain the momentum that we had last session. I'm focusing on water, obviously, and on roads, and I think we'll continue that here in a healthy debate on how we fund transportation. But no question in my mind that the passage of the proposition in November was extraordinary. The fact that we're very focused now on ending this diversion, taking these very critical dollars for DPS and funding a way to pay for them out of GR as opposed to Fund 6 is a very positive step, I think. And I think this debate here over this bill that's been introduced by Chairman Nichols over in the Senate is a very healthy debate. I mean, again, I think to my good friend Drew's perspective, it's hard to make it predictable in terms of funding stream when roads take 10 or 15 or 20 years into the future to plan and to forecast. But I do think it's a positive step in the right direction that we're having this conversation. And I will make one more comment. You know, in my time in the legislature, we've seen regional solutions and so forth. I don't think there is such a thing as a regional solution for Texas and our 27 million people. I think we've got to have a statewide solution and not a regional one, because I don't think we'll ever be effective with that type of approach.
Obviously, school finance is looming. The court probably won't rule, I guess, till now. They're saying till maybe next year. So this might be a special session in 2016, or even they'll hold off to the next regular. Is there any thought by any of you given to setting aside some amount of money in anticipation of that? Good idea, bad idea?
Well, all you have to do is look at the House's introduced bill. The House basically covered population growth of roughly 85,000 students per year. And then the money that is actually comes into school districts to the state's benefit, because as property values go up, your local school taxes obviously rise also because those property values went up. The state therefore doesn't have to send you as much money. What the House did is we said that means after we cover population growth in our public schools, there's still $2.2 billion of taxpayer money that essentially the state is going to take advantage of. Well, the House put that money back into the education budget. The $2.2 billion is sitting there. It is noted that we have not determined in what manner it will be distributed. I think
that's over and above growth.
That's over and above growth.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we're going to look at what do we do that improves our position and improves our schools. I don't think I'm comfortable, as the last subcommittee chair on Article 3 last session, I'm not comfortable sitting on my hands and doing nothing. Can we solve and do what Judge Dietz said? No. That's $8 billion a year. Okay, but should we ignore it and not do anything for public schools, public education? No, I think that's worse.
So any thoughts by any of you all on how that $2.2 billion should be distributed in terms of addressing both equity and adequacy?
Chairman Aycock and a bunch of members had an ad hoc group that met and talked about school finance, various school districts throughout the state, various regions, poor schools, rich schools, trying to come up and brainstorm about ideas that where we could put the best bang for our buck pending the outcome of the litigation. So several things have been floated. I don't think a consensus on any one of these, but things that are being floated: transportation allotment. Altogether, throughout the 1,100 plus school districts in Texas, we spend about $1.3 billion, and they spend about $1.3 billion in transportation costs. We reimburse them about $300 million. So $1 billion, if you're looking at 2.2 over the biennium, that's $1 billion a year. Well, the math works pretty good if we just reimburse them their total cost of all their transportation. Every school gets it. It would be string free, as they say. They could use it on their priorities in their school. So that's one idea being floated. The cost of education index is another. But I think the House pre-K funding pre-K. Representative Ashby has a bill, 645, I believe, that takes a look at small school multiplier. If you have 1,600 or less average daily attendant and your school district is under 300 square miles, then you get penalized. It was an effort many years back to urge consolidation of small schools, but now that factor has continued to be used, and so schools that are approximately the same size, one school has under 300 square miles in their district and one school has over 300 square miles, there's a big disparity between what those schools, the very poorest schools, are getting hit the hardest on that small school multiplier. So that's about $250 million that we could get to those schools.
Would either of those proposals, though, have the impact of being more de-equalizing in terms of an even spread, regardless of wealth, in terms of transportation or small?
Transportation would not have any regard to wealth. It's simply.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're giving to both the rich and the poor,
Yep.
are you exacerbating the difference?
Talk about it.
Yeah, you possibly could be. That's why there's been several different, I mean, last session, we put basically all the restoration money, the $3.4 billion, back into raising the regular program factor back to 1 and putting the rest of it in the basic allotment. Because the basic allotment is by far probably the most equitable way to distribute money because it floats all boats higher, but it floats the boats that are from property poor districts more. All right, now do you close the gap? No, you don't. You close it some. So that's also out there on the table, but there's been no decisions made as of yet as to all the House has said is, look, we shouldn't be creating our budget and balancing it on the back of taxpayers who are paying money to a school district, and then we're turning around and taking the benefit of that money.
Right.
All right, we're going to put it back into education, whatever that amount is. That's what the $2.2 billion is. And it's clearly stated in our budget, though we have not determined what's the most proper way to improve funding and equity as a result of having that $2.2 billion spent.
Dr. Zerwas,
on that bill, just real quick though, is I think what you can take from this conversation though is that the House is not considering itself paralyzed when it comes to funding of schools and really looking at what are some things that could really change the value of our schools out there. We're looking at some very meaty topics despite the fact that, you know, there's still yet to be a decision made in the Supreme Court.
so you're not being frozen by the, obviously, as some would have you believe.
Just the opposite, I would say.
By the looming court decision.
Just the opposite.
Or taking action. We'll start with you, Dr. Zerwas, if you don't mind. The rainy day fund, it's going to grow over the years, we hope, as the economy continues to grow. Perhaps are we socking away too much money? What are your thoughts on an appropriate amount? Should we lower the limit?
Well, I think actually there is an upper limit to what
Yes,
can go into the rainy day fund.
My question would be, is that too high or is that appropriate?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, the rainy day fund, appropriately named, you know, for economic stabilization, is going to come in at about $11 billion. That's what I believe the comptroller's office has said. It is there and intended to be there to help preserve our times when the economy is a little bit rocky. And it has served that purpose for us in the past. In fact, when it was, I think, established in the very late 80s on the heels of the oil bust, that was entirely the intended purpose of that, is so that when we hit these times, we can ride them out.
At the time, I mean, it was considered to be a much smaller fund than it's projected.
Correct, yes, as most of them are.
Right.
So, but I do think that it's, you know, I don't see that there's any sort of urgent things happening out there right now that we would say is that there and that we need to tap into that rainy day fund.
What about, Mr. Otto, you talked about getting to paying down the debt after the fund reaches a certain amount. Would it be prudent to take perhaps a lower limit and use some of that for debt reduction?
Well, when you say take a lower limit, I guess my answer would be, I think we ought to abide by the limit that was set as it was originally adopted in statute and with what was going on at that time. So I don't have any problems with how the debt limit is calculated. I think 10% of the money that was deposited into general revenue is a good measure, okay? I don't have any problem with that. The reason I filed HJR 8 is because we're approaching the limit. And one of my concerns is what happens when you hit the limit is that money spills back over into general revenue. And to me, that is not an identifiable, sustainable amount of spillover, as I'll call it. And to me, the best use of that money is to go in and call debt early. And by doing that, you basically free up general revenue that you're currently using for debt service now for some other purpose. So I think the HJR 8 is my attempt to say, look, here is a really viable way to reduce our debt. And we've all talked about the Prop 12 and Prop 14 bonds, some of which are being, sizable debt service on those. We borrowed $18 billion, we're going to pay back $31 billion. If we could early retire some of that debt, that would free up some general revenue for other things, like roads.
Sure. Lots of issues out there. Obviously, tax cuts are on a lot of people's minds. Is there a number? I think the Senate, the other body, talked about $4 billion this morning in terms of tax relief. A large part of that, I believe, what we're hearing is going to go to homesteads, obviously representing the business community. We think since we pay 62% of all combined state and local taxes, we think the 60% ratio of tax reduction should apply. Now, there may not be overwhelming support for that, but I would ask for your comments. If we're going to increase the homestead exemption, are we going to further shift the burden to business, or are we going to have some rate relief?
I had an interesting conversation with Dale Kramer yesterday. He understands that I have a real local issue with removing personal property tax on businesses.
Do you think it's a good idea? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, here's why. The largest taxpayer in my school district, in my county, in my city, is a rail storage facility that stores 6,000 rail cars of plastic resins that are manufactured along the ship channel. If you're going to take that much personal property off my tax rolls, then somebody needs to tell me what you're going to do to help me fund my schools. City and the county are another issue. We don't really get into that bailiwick. But he said, what if we proposed that along with increasing the homestead exemption, we eliminated the property tax on all personal property, and we gave them on the schools, and we gave the businesses that pay those a credit dollar for dollar on the franchise tax for the amount of the personal property tax they were paying, which means my school is now not effective. I could take a serious look at something like that, where I'm granting relief both to homeowners and to business owners.
Mr. Darby, you care to comment?
I agree with Representative Otto. There will be serious tax cuts offered up by this legislative session. How and in what fashion they take place is open for the discussion. I agree with you that as we look at how to help homeowners here in Texas, we ought to look at how we help our businesses. And what proportion, I think, is something every state representative in this room will want to have a say-so in, and so
We can help them with that.
Well, you have an opinion, and they have an opinion too, and more importantly, or just as importantly, they have a vote, and so we'll all have to come together on good sound policy cuts.
Well, I just concur really with my colleagues, what you've already heard, everybody. I mean, first and foremost, I think it's a wonderful situation we're in, that we're talking about how we're going to deliver, obviously, on tax relief. Whether or not you provide more relief to businesses directly and to homeowners, or whether or not you look at buying down debt early. These are all terrific situations to have to deal with, so we're very blessed. The other topic that you asked a moment ago with regard to our rainy day fund and the size of it, I, for one, think it's a very important part of what I refer to as our Texas model, right? Some people will call the Texas economy the last 10, 12, 15 years the Texas miracle. I prefer to call it the Texas model, because to me it's been an integral part of making Texas work. The reality is that when we have that level of protection against instability and global economic currents that are beyond our control, it's given, I think, businesses a tremendous level of confidence and comfort, as it does, obviously, the various rating agencies. If you look at the kind of ratings that we have on our debt, it's extraordinary, and so it's again because of the excellence, I believe, and the model that we put in place in Texas. And so having a strong rainy day fund that hovers at this $11 to $12 billion range, I think is very important. And I do love the concept that you just described as well, Chairman Otto, about as it gets closer to 12, how we address that with regard to buying down debt. I think that is, again, a principal issue for us to focus on this session in the debate. But again, I think we're having, this discussion is a terrific one in the sense that we've got lots of good options with the resources we've been blessed to have.
I guess we have time for one more question. Dr. Zerwas, on the franchise tax issue, basically what's being discussed is, I think there's consensus of making the cuts from the previous year permanent. But there's discussion about either reducing the tax rate or increasing the level of the exemption as a possibility. Do you have any thoughts on the merits of either one of those?
Well, I think that probably either one is excuse me, I'm sorry, is reasonable to have the conversation about. I mean, we have taken the position of raising the level of the exemption as a way to, accommodate some of the interests of our businesses out there. Looking at the rate versus raising it, I think that's part of what the conversation just needs to be about, and where people feel like we can get the most value, and it turns around and makes it a more attractive place here for people to do their businesses.
One of the comments I hear a lot, and I know everyone here has to listen to stories about how it's not fair. How it, even though I'm losing money in my business, I'm paying all these franchise taxes, or margin taxes. And so I think the fairness of the tax would be on the table just as much as, do we include the right exemptions? Do we approach it in the same way with various industries? So I would hope that we focus not only on the rate and the exemption, but also the composition of the tax and how we compute it.
Very good. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you.